Today, we're going to talk about the retirement income bucket strategy. We have talked about creating retirement income on the show for years. I don't think we've ever talked about the retirement bucket strategy, maybe in passing. But in the last show, Tony inspired me to talk about the bucket strategy because he was getting confused on the tax bracket strategy. He accused me of misnaming the show, but no, Tony, welcome. Today we are going to talk about the retirement income bucket strategy, which you were referencing. In fact, I think you were referencing like tax buckets, Roth versus traditional versus non-qualified. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about creating retirement income and putting your money in different buckets. And I want to talk about.
But aren't those different buckets tax related? I mean,
No.
aren't we talking about the same thing?
No.
Oh,
No.
okay.
It can be. That's a different conversation. That's another layer on the lasagna. Right?
Okay. So we got a lot of buckets.
We got a lot of buckets. Don't kick the bucket during the show. Strategy. All right. So here's the strategy of the retirement income bucket. You have different pools of money in different buckets based on your income timing need. So if you need money in the short term, there's a short-term bucket. If you need money 20 years from now, that's the 20-year bucket. And you put the money in these different buckets, timing your income need to match what the investments are. So as an example, I'll use a very simplistic one, which is very common and I see, and which people get. It's 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is the income you need in years 1 through 3 of retirement now. Bucket 2 is where you get the income you need in years 4 through 9. And then the third bucket is anything that you don't need to touch for 10 years for income purposes. So you could see how, all right, well.
So it's timing based instead of tax based.
Timing instead of tax based. And it's allocation based. So the key here is, well, what do I do with these buckets? But timing wise, you refill the bucket 1 as money is being spent. And then you rebalance the buckets over time. Like I said, rebalancing is key. We had Mr. Miyagi on a past show talking about balance with the Karate Kid. And that still holds true. It holds true across retirement. So as you spend that money from bucket 1, I'll say there's a hole in that bucket. There, Liza. As you spend that money, you need to refill it. Right? And I think people get this. It's very visual, and of course I don't have any visuals on it, but it's very simplistic. I see a lot of people use this. A lot of retirement people use this in the retirement space. But I would say it's more complex than some of the other strategies, but it seems simple. But what do you put in each bucket? Right.
In other words, where is the money at that is in each bucket? So if it's money you need within the next 2 years, should that be in the stock market? Should that be an annuity? Should that be in a bank? Should it be in a CD? So there are different places you can have that money. That's the trick, right? That's the key to this whole thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's, well, what do you put in each bucket? And then how does that change over time? See, the putting it in each bucket's easy. All right. Anything that I don't need for 10 years is going in the stock market. Let's roll the dice. Right. Anything I need in the next 1 to 3 years, I'm going to put in cash or cash equivalents or CDs or something at the bank. Right.
Right.
Because I don't want the market to determine what my cash need is going to be the next 3 years. And then in the middle, there's a lot more of an investment world. What do I do? Do I create dividend stocks? Do I put in a multi-year guarantee annuity? Do I ladder these CDs? What do I do? You know? And there's so people get that.
Yeah.
And that's usually where it stops. But the real trick is, well, what happens as you're going along? Because your timeline shifting and your buckets need to change. And so do you take money out of the 10-year bucket and put it in the 1 year, or do you put that in the 5 year? And then Do you take money out of the 5-year into the 1 year? Because after a year goes by, now your short-term bucket's only 2 years. Well, what do I do? Do I refill it? There's a hole in my bucket. So something to be said about this, though, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't apply. The bucket strategy doesn't matter if you've already got your income. We're talking about this is an income strategy. So if you are retired and you're living on your Social Security and a pension, and you don't have an income need above that, you're living within those means, but you have assets, you don't need to put them in buckets, because, I mean, really, if your income need is met, you don't need a strategy for creating income. This income bucket strategy is for people that don't have their income met by a fixed pension or Social Security, right? They need to generate the other income. And so, well, I'll just put it all in the bank. Will it last? Are you going to get enough return? Well, I'll just put it all in the stock market. What if it goes down? Will you run out of money? And so the key to the retirement income bucket strategy is to protect against the risk. And I want to go into pros and cons of it.
Right. And it has to do and you get into the details. You're right. It is a little more complex because liquidity is a big factor of what you're talking about. Right.
Right. If you need money in the next 6 months, you can't have that in a CD tied up for 2 years. Well, you could, but then that defeats the purpose. Right. So liquidity is key. And at the same time, do you like liquidity? People like liquidity, especially when they're retired. They like to have that in their bank. We did one of our most popular shows that we've done, Tony, is, you're not going to believe this. It's how much should you keep at the bank? That was the show. It was like, how much cash should you have?
Right.
So many people watch that and comment, and they're like, well, what about this? What about? And the point of that was, well, yeah, keeping cash on the bank is great, but you're not making anything on it. So you're going to want to keep that to a minimum.
You have to have some growth. Hey, Dan, true story. Another financial advisor, a financial professional that I've worked with, told me this last week. A woman came to him, $7 million in her checking account. $7 million. See, so you and I could live very rich lives off the interest she could make on that money if she had it somewhere else. Just the interest.
I'm going to guess that the bank wasn't giving her much interest, and the bank absolutely loves her as a client.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, the bank might give her, 2%. I mean, if she's lucky,
which is still a sizable check, monthly, but you could do so much more with that.
She's losing out. I mean, she's not keeping up with inflation even at that amount. But people say, well, she's got $7 million. Who cares? Well, first of all, it's only insured up to what, $250,000.
Right.
So since we're talking about how much to leave in the bank, you don't want more than $250,000 in a bank.
But
in
for
one
her,
bank,
it comes down to retirement income need. If she doesn't need more than the 2% interest that $7 million spitting out, right, which may be the case, then
but her money's at risk if the bank goes under.
Right. There's other risks. There's other reasons to allocate funds.
Plus, you never want all your eggs in one basket. Right. That's. Yeah.
But a simple
in one bucket. I'm sorry, bucket. We're talking buckets.
Well, now we're bucket. So a simple approach is like the 4% rule. All right, let me just set a withdrawal rate and take what the market gives, put it in a 60-40 portfolio, and over time that's a lot more simple. People get, whoa, that's complex, that's scary, but it's simple. There's really not much to think about it. Once you say the bucket strategy, oh, that's real simple. No, it's not. It's more complex because you're aging. The buckets constantly have to change. And who's going to do that? And what's appropriate? Whereas the withdrawal rate, you just set it and forget it. Ron Popeil rotisserie chicken thing, right?
Yeah, Ron Popeil. Yeah.
So the bucket strategy is more complex than people make it out to be, but it seems very simple. So let's go through the pros and cons of it. So lower stress. And that's because there's a perceived safety and stability, predictability on this.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I just got done saying, no, it's not that easy. However, when you, especially as a financial advisor, when I meet with somebody and I say, all right, you're going to retire, and their big concern is they're going to run out of money, right? That's the big thing. Besides, oh, what am I going to do for health insurance? That's the biggie, right? And then I'm going to run out of money because health insurance is so expensive. And I say, we're going to take 3 years of your income that you need for the next 3 years, and we're going to put it over here in the checking account. We're not going to do the checking account, but you know what I mean. We're going to put it in the income bucket for the short term. The level of stress goes down because now they're tangible. They feel it. They're like, okay, so if so-and-so gets elected, or if we go to war with so-and-so, or if my house gets, if the stock market crashes, right? They have that predictable 3 years of there's my money. They don't care about the other noise.
Yeah. The principle's protected. It's always going to be there.
And that is a huge pro. Yeah. And a reason why this is very useful in my industry, because it takes the stress level down.
You can sleep well at night knowing, hey, my bills are going to be covered. That money is not at risk.
But in reality, later money is in risk, and that shift is complex, and that is something to stress about, but they're not thinking those lines because they see that 3 years, right? But that assumes that short-term bucket is constantly refilled. Another pro to this is that there's growth potential. When you throw a 10-year bucket in and you throw it in the stock market and you're not worried about it because that's so far out, it has growth potential, which is what you need. A lot of times you need, so that the growth over there in 10 years will then be used to fund your income need in 10 years. So, this is the bucket strategy prevents someone from doing what your client, what you just said, the $7 million in checking. Right. It might work.
I didn't even know that was possible.
Well, I mean,
those numbers are too big for me.
Right. It's tough to comprehend. But if you won the lotto and you're like, well, I could live off 1% interest. Why would I mess with it? Right. That's not necessarily the most ideal situation, but I'll tell you, sleep at night. Maybe.
But Dan, I have a question about this bucket system. So the way you just described it, so the 2 to 3 years, the 3-year bucket, where the money is completely protected, it's money will be there. And then that third bucket, that's all at risk, that's money you don't need for a long time. That's at least 10 years out. The high risk, throw it in the market or whatever you're doing that's high risk that has returns, growth. I think those are easy. That what you just described, that's easy. You have easy solutions for people. Yes. The reason people need you is the middle bucket. What about mid-term? I think the tough part is the in-between. I think that's the trick, solving for that, where I need growth, but I also need some protection. Isn't that the trick right there?
That is the trick. The real trick, Tony, is rebalancing on a continual basis, without trying to time everything. Because the theory is on the bucket strategy is the middle bucket is designed to be income producing without major risk, but with some risk, right? So there's going to be some ups and downs there. And that 10-year bucket's going to be whipsawing. So the question is, when the market's doing well, let's take from the 10-year bucket and throw it in the mid bucket or the short-term bucket.
Sure.
If the market's doing terrible, let's not sell the stocks but you go to your short-term bucket there. But how long? Eventually that's going to run out. So you're going to need to use that middle bucket, which has hopefully got some stability of some sort. So the world is your oyster there, but you have to do, and this has to shift because you're getting older every year, right? So yes, it is a lot trickier than people think, but it just seems simple. A lot of people, if people are overwhelmed by this, what I said in the beginning is, if your income is already met, so you could buy treasuries and get 4.5% or whatever, 30-year treasuries US, and just get the income you need, and then the rest, say you have a couple $100,000 left, you just roll the dice with it, or you don't, doesn't matter, right? But it's these people that are like, well, I don't have enough to just rest on my $7 million checking account. I need to, and so the middle bucket is complex in its design, but even more tricky is taking money from each bucket and shifting it over time. It forces balance though. So by having a bucket strategy, you're not going to be 7 million in checking. You're also not going to be 7 million in the stock market, even though you potentially could afford it. You're forcing some sort of balance, and it can stop market timing. It can stop market timing, but it can also lead to market timing. Like I said, the stock market's down, I'm going to take from my safe money. If the stock market's up, I'll take from there. You're timing the market there. You're timing it. It might be simpler and better to just have some rules. Be like, which brings me back to the other point, which is if you have a set withdrawal rate of 4%, you're going to take from the market when it's up. When it's down, you're not going to overthink it. Here with a bucket strategy, you might begin to overthink where you're pulling from.
Yeah.
And it could also reduce sequence of return risk. Huge risk is if the market tanks early and you have all your money in the market early, then you can run the risk of running out of money. It doesn't eliminate sequence of return risk because you're still going to be pulling the money. But it can reduce it. That's the pros. That's the pros to it. The cons to this is you're kind of trapped. And a lot of people feel trapped by that. I don't want to lock my, I can get 5.5% on a 5-year fixed MYGA, multi-year guarantee annuity. 5.5% for 5 years. There's a 5-year bucket right there that'll come due, and then I don't like that. What if I need that money?
Mm-hmm.
You feel that I
it's
don't
locked in.
Yeah, I don't want to buy a CD for 1 year. What if I need the money?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of ladder these things. What if if I put money in the 10-year and it goes down that first year, I feel terrible. I shouldn't have put that money in the 10-year. Remember, that's the 10 years. You can let it ride. Sometimes that bothers me. They feel like, I want to be more nimble, which always leads to trouble. Well, not always, but leads to trouble. Another downside to this is that first year bucket that, usually people get low returns. They put it in the checking account. Right now, 2025, you can get 4% at the bank, which is amazing relative to where just 5 years ago we were like, you pay 4% to have money at the bank. Here's another con to the bucket strategy. What if you have a large expense? I had some clients that got hit by the hurricane and they had insurance. And so you have insurance for that. That's what insurance is for. Yeah, but insurance doesn't pay right away. You got to jump through hoops. The county's looking and saying, we want you to go up. We want you to, and so you're footing the bill for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
What bucket does that come from? There is no hurricane destroyed my house bucket. So, right. So that could be tricky, but that's going to be a problem no matter what strategy you're using. But in this strategy, you need to rebalance. Or, which a lot of people do, is they just let it go and then they become more risky as they get older, which is okay. That's a rising glide path, they call it. So let's imagine, Tony, you have the bucket strategy and 2 years go by and you're draining your 2/3 of your 3-year bucket.
Right.
But the stock market's done really well and you don't rebalance. What's fundamentally happened is you're happy because the stock market's gone well and your 10-year bucket's up 30%. You're like, I love this strategy, Dan. But if you look at the big picture, you spent 2/3 of your short-term bucket, your long-term bucket's up 30%. So if you look at the big picture, you are way more risky than you were when you started.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, so that's okay. You can go down that path and just follow, the dots down the path, but you will be more risky that way if things go right. And then you're saying, well, I don't like it. So rebalancing is key, but it's also tricky. So that's the downside to this. I think people really overestimate the simplicity of it. It just sounds good. It makes sense. It's easy to explain to your spouse who isn't involved in math at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I created a bucket strategy and it'd take me 3 minutes to tell my wife, here is the bucket strategy. Here's what we're going to do. She'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. Right now, my wife's finance.
That's why financial advisors use that.
I think so
with their clients.
I think so, because it's easy for people to visualize and accept, especially those that aren't into it.
But there has to be rebalancing as it goes along, and that's where people are so nowadays used to set it and forget it.
Yes.
I've got a strategy. I'm done. I don't need to worry about that anymore.
Right.
Which is a great feeling to have, but it's wrong.
Right. It's like the duck on the water. It looks nice gliding along, but it's doing stuff underneath. So if you don't do the stuff underneath, maybe the financial advisor is just lazy, doesn't know how to rebalance. It sounds great. Oh, bucket, or set it and forget it. But no, you have. What if things happen? Life happens. Emergency. Market goes crazy up. Market goes crazy down. You need to rebalance that. You can't just rest on your laurels. So that's where it gets tricky, and that's the downside to it. Yeah. So it's easy to envision. You get this feeling of set it and forget it, low risk, predictability. You feel good about it, but it's a lot trickier if you don't set up guidelines or have specific rules or pay someone to do it or have a system. If you kind of just let it and hope, you just, you really haven't done anything but budget different buckets for different time. And that can work against you if the market conditions, if that happens, right? You just don't know. Right. I was looking right before we started. I was looking for some background music that I thought was appropriate. I had never heard this before.
There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole.
Yeah.
so
I love that.
Dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry, oh fix it, dear Henry, fix it.
Oh, fix it, dear Dan, dear Dan, dear Dan. Fix my hole in the bucket. How do you fix it?
I don't remember. That was a kid's song, right? I remember there's a hole, and to fix it, he needed some hay was something, and then the hay you had to cut it, and he didn't have his knife was not sharp, so he needed the
like
whetstone.
Harry Belafonte and Liza Miller.
Yeah, that was Harry Belafonte. I don't know who the woman is. Odetta.
Yeah.
And you need to sharpen your knife, but you need water for the whetstone, so there's a hole in the bucket. It's this loop, right?
I love
so
that.
imagine the same scenario. Your hole is in the first bucket because you're spending that.
Yeah,
there's no holes in the other bucket, but you got to fill the other. So do you lift the middle bucket and fill the first bucket? Do you lift the third bucket, and then, or do you take the third to go to the middle, and then the middle to that's how much. That's the art,
and that all depends on the situation. So that's why you have to have work with a financial advisor who's going to look at your personal situation, get involved, and keep you on track.
Yeah, and it could be a do-it-yourselfer that does this, but I would argue that the do-it-yourselfer would be better off just taking a flat withdrawal rate with inflation, and the income.
Well, you can make I wouldn't recommend doing it yourself because of the expensive mistakes. You can make some costly mistakes that could derail your retirement. Why? I mean,
right. But I think that what my point is if you're going to do it yourself or not, don't be tricked into thinking the retirement bucket strategy is simplistic. What is simplistic is the set withdrawal rate. That's much more simplistic. But regardless of which way you go, there's always going to be curveballs, so you got to be prepared for that. And that's what makes this whole thing difficult. And that's it. So Tony, there's a hole in your bucket. Do you have a hole in your bucket? Your problem is you have a hole in your bucket and you're not even retired yet. You're surrounded by the fruits of that hole in your bucket.
Yeah, right back there. That's my hole in the bucket.
So plug that hole, stop spending frivolously on LPs and records and whatever you call them, and get to retirement, and then we'll talk.
Yes. All right.
All right, Tony, thanks for a good show. Now you're happy, or do you want to talk about tax buckets? Do we have to do that at the next show?
Well, at some point, people are in people are sick of hearing about taxes right now, probably because they're in the thick of it, tax season. But
that's true.
But yeah, those are the timing buckets. But within those buckets, then you have tax designations to more complicate it further. So it's part of the same story.
I guess so. We'll revisit it. Thanks for
There's a little bucket inside. There's little buckets inside the
mini
bigger bucket.
Right. Yeah. All right, Tony. Thanks for a good show. We'll catch everyone next week.
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Riddle nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.